story you told me about, Vedanta. I said, yes. He said, well, turns out she works at a Christian school. And so she'd mentioned this. And then, in fact, she'd taken the story and she'd gone online and she'd found more details about the story. She found an NGO that was running the campaign, or one of the campaigns. And then she'd worked with her students, and her students had all written letters to the authorities in India to say that this company should not get the rights to mine this hill. So it's quite an interesting story, that, because it shows there's two elements to social media. One is social media moves very quickly. The other is that social media is a store of information over the long term. And so this is an example of it being a store of information over the long term. In 2010, Vedanta finally lost the battle. I think they were down 10% on the day. It's unusual to see the issue crystallizing in the stock price just like that. The green line is the FTSE, just as a comparative, and the blue line shows what happened shortly after the announcement. Here's an example of a company that's getting it right on human rights. Unilever just released its first of its kind human rights report at the end of June this year. If you haven't seen it, for sustainability report watchers amongst you, it's a really interesting document. The detail that they go into, and quite how far they go into their supply chain, and the level of consideration, I found really quite interesting. And this, of course, reduces risks. So one of the issues that they picked up in one of their facilities in Kenya related to tea is sexual harassment of the workforce. And so they chose to address this. They set up weekly meetings, and they found that it wasn't good enough just to work within the workforce. They had to go into the community to some extent as well, identify community leaders and work with community leaders to address the issues. And now they're finding that they've got much better engagement. People are understanding the policies. People are understanding the acceptable behaviors. I've pulled out one graphic from that report just to show the level of transparency that Unilever's willing to go to. And this shows the non-conformances by country. Each column is a country. And the different colors are the salient issues, whether it's health and safety, disciplinary issues, working hours, and so on and so forth. That's the level of detail, and that's a way of really addressing human rights issues in their supply chain. And of course, that reduces the risk that Unilever is going to be caught in a social media issue. And if they are, they at least have a defensive story. They can say something, okay, we got it wrong, and we're going to try and improve. So I'll switch just quickly to a different sector, still on risk management. BNI, another Indonesian state-owned bank. And their thinking was that they want to be environmentally responsible. So they thought, well, what are we going to do? What does it mean for us to be environmentally responsible? So responsible lending is one element of that. In Indonesia, the government runs a rating system called the Proper system with different bands, gold, green, blue, red, black. They said we're not going to lend to companies in red and black. And you can see in 2011 that these percentages here show the proportion of the commercial loan book which is in the different categories of ratings. And it doesn't feature very well on that screen, but the final column shows that black is 0%, and red has gone down to 9% by 2013 from 25% in 2011. There's two different lessons here. One is, if you're a bank, there are things that you can do too, which are related to your core business, not just about CO2 footprint, but thinking about responsible lending. The other is, if you're a company that has a poor record, you've just lost one potential financier. So this is a cost of capital issue over time as well. Let's switch to the third value driver, productivity improvement. There's different elements. It's usually easier to get hard numbers, hard data on productivity improvement from resource efficiency. Green buildings is another possible example. I think we're going to be hearing on green buildings later. So Marks and Spencer's 160 million sterling from Plan A. We'll look at the breakdown of that in a moment. And GE, General Electric, mentioned $350 million. That's water savings, energy savings, CO2 savings. We can also get productivity improvement from our staff. Companies that are recruiting and retaining and promoting women better will have a better balanced workforce, better use of talent. Employees' engagement is also really helpful in terms of morale. Actually, sustainability programs, typically, the staff really like them. They get really motivated. And finally, occupational health and safety. I mean, obviously, if we have more health and safety incidents, that represents a cost to the business. There'll be fines, there'll be compensation, there'll be stoppages. So reducing that, which is part of sustainability programs, is again a way of reducing risks and improving productivity. So this is the Marks and Spencer trend. In 2007, they committed to spend 200 million, and they spent 40 million in the first year. They broke even in the second year, and then suddenly they found that these were all of the net benefits from their program, increasing year after year. This was much faster than they'd actually expected. So very often companies are finding that they do the investments and the returns are better than anticipated. I'd like to switch from the business case and just spend a little time talking about what we should see in good reporting. 2 steps. The first step is before the reporting, and it's around the board and what the board's duties should be. So the board's duties typically should be to identify the material issues and then consider how we're going to manage these issues, how we're going to get the growth, how we're going to manage the risk. Do we need policies to do this? Do we need KPIs to do this? Should we have a target or a commitment? And then when they decided those things, what should they disclose? Is sustainability reporting the right mechanism? Do we want to have a public target? Public targets are very helpful. They make everybody really work towards it. Now you put yourself there in public. Having worked that out, whatever you disclose, here are sort of 5 strong suggestions. Link to the value drivers or the stakeholder concern. Make it really relevant to the audience. Provide the scope and the assurance levels, otherwise it's very hard to understand what the report is referring to. Talk about problems as well as good news. So the Unilever example is really interesting on that. That whole slide was each of those non-conformances was a problem, and they're willing to put that publicly and show that they're trying to address it. People who are reading a sustainability report, when they see that there's some problems, some bad news in it, has much more credibility. Ideally, allow year-to-year comparison so that people can see the trends moving through time. And also explain the context. If you've got a KPI means it's a key performance indicator, it's important, then why has it moved from one year to the next? Sometimes you just see that the thing's moved, but you can't actually analyze it. So if you provide the context for why it's moved, that's really, really helpful. I mentioned before concluding, I want to share something about communicating with investors. So I was a fund manager first, actually. I should probably have mentioned that at the beginning. So the investor part is something which I know well because I'm from that part of industry. There are benefits to communicating with investors. Investors that look at ESG will typically have a longer-term horizon. but we do need to think about the audience a little bit. Okay, so we're not, when we think about investors, we're not thinking about the controlling shareholder. They can talk whenever they want. And we're not thinking really about the retail shareholders either. Hopefully they will be engaged, but that's not typically the audience. It's institutional investors. There'll be broadly two types: domestic institutional investors, who I understand are starting on the ESG journey, and international institutional investors. Many of the international institutions are now on board with ESG. Often it's through the Principles for Responsible Investment. And the challenge, though, is that the investors are in faraway countries. It's Europe, it's the US, maybe Australia. It's a very difficult challenge to communicate with them. You won't necessarily hear directly from them. That doesn't mean they aren't looking. They can be downloading the sustainability reports, or they can have an information intermediary that is doing that for them. And so you have the company, the information intermediary, the ESG analyst sitting in another country, and they're informing the fund manager. The relationship between the fund manager and company may not include the communication around ESG. When investors pick up the information, there's three things that they do with it: screening, engagement, integration. What do these mean? Screening is something, very often it's ethical. We don't want tobacco. We don't want alcohol. No weapons. Integration, it's pretty similar to the kind of examples that I've been giving, integration. It's where you say, oh, look, this company is doing really well on sustainability. Might its profits be better? Maybe we should be paying a bit more for it. Or this company is really bad. Does that mean it's running extra risks? We should pay less for it. And engagement is the middle one, where companies will try to improve the standards of, investors will try to improve the standards of companies where they have a holding. So those companies that are doing ESG, are putting the information out there, can attract longer-term investors, particularly the global institutions. I'd like to conclude. Corporate sustainability and reporting helps. It helps by identifying new growth areas, by better risk management, by identifying costs and savings. It helps because it motivates staff, and it can help by attracting longer-term investors. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to any questions. Hopefully there'll be questions from the audience, but if not, I think we have some pre-prepared.
ไม่ทราบว่ามีคำถามเพิ่มเติมไหมคะถ้ามีสามารถยกมือได้เลยนะคะเราจะมีเจ้าหน้าที่นะคะนำไมโครโฟนไปให้นะคะ
So I would like to start with a prepared question. The first one is, in your opinion, what are critical sustainability issues that Thai businesses are facing? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure there's actually many people in the audience that will have a better view of your own country. But I suppose that a few that perhaps I'll look at, I'll mention four. One is, in the longer term, energy access. So where is the oil going to come from in the longer term? That's quite fundamental. Another is climate change adaptation. So the weather patterns in Southeast Asia are particularly subject to change, and my understanding is that a lot of the water is rainwater that's used in Thailand. So the way in which climate change could happen could be significant. Two others, which are more on the social side, are human rights and corruption. Okay. I'm not going to say any more because I'd like to be invited back, but so those would be the ones I'd suggest.
thank you for the presentation. I think it's very interesting. But I would like to asking you more about the maturity assessment. I think you're touching on it a little bit. That from your point of view as a previous fund manager, what is the best approach to identify the material issue of the companies?
Well, that's a great question. And there's different definitions. I think that there's two main thrusts. One is material from a financial perspective. So there are accounting definitions around that. The accounting definition might be 5% of assets or turnover or profit or an operating metric. The other element is material to the stakeholder. So if it's important to the stakeholder, then it counts. For example, if you're an investor and you're structuring an approach to assessing ESG of a company, and you want to have a screen, you might go, well, here's a company, it produces torture equipment. It doesn't matter how much torture equipment that company is producing, you might just think it's an ethical no-no and we can't therefore hold it. Even if it's only $1. So it might not be financially material, but it can be ethically material. For companies that are designing a process, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board that I mentioned lists for different industries the material issues. That's really useful. You know, CO2. Is CO2 relevant to a coal company? Yes. Potentially, it could be very significant. It could change its business. Is CO2 relevant to a property company? Well, sort of a bit. I mean, if you can manage down the energy costs, then yes. Is CO2 relevant to a bank? Well, not really, unless the bank is lending a lot of money to coal companies, in which case it's very relevant. So materiality is very different for the different sectors. There are lists. There is the other approach, which you may have been getting at, I'm not sure, is on how to construct a materiality matrix. GRI has some processes relating to that, the Global Reporting Initiative. And yeah, it's a really useful engagement. You just need to listen to what people have to say. So get in touch with the stakeholders, ask their opinion. And stakeholders means external as well as internal. I hope that's answered.
Yep, thank you.
There's a question over here, but no microphone. I think there's one just coming.
Hi, Pavina from Minor. I have two questions. The first question would be, are there any differences between the differences in terms of interest between the investor in different regions, like European country, North America, and somewhere else like Middle East? That's the first question. The second question is, since you touch upon the incidents or issues that we should be considering disclosing information, and it sounds like you encourage us to disclose because it sounds more credential. Could you please give example on how come it sounds beneficial for company instead of opening the negative impact later on? Maybe you give good example, because I think most of us were scared to identify the issues and disclose it in the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. You couldn't just mention one again, could you? I'm really sorry. Oh, different regions, different regions.
Different regions.
Sorry about that. Mine went blank when I was listening to the second part. Different regions. So Europe has got the strongest focus on ESG issues. Australia also has a strong focus. That's because of the way their pension system works. They have super funds that the pension industry is particularly focused on responsible investment. The US is starting to pick up now quite strongly. In Asia, the focus has been lower, but part of it's because of the language. So one of my favorite examples on this is if you think about food safety in China. I'm sure everybody in the room is familiar with that there are some food safety issues in China. We know that. So if you were to speak to a fund manager invested in a Chinese company, do you do anything on ESG? Oh, no, we don't do anything on ESG. Okay. Have you just met a food company from China? Yes. Did you discuss food safety? Well, yes, of course we discussed food safety. It's the first thing we talked about. You know, oh, but you don't do ESG. So there might be some conversations, good fundamental analysis of the company, which actually is ESG, but they don't call it ESG. It's just, but it is still happening. But in terms of ESG that is called ESG, Europe is the clear leader. Then coming to your second question, why disclose things that are a bit uncomfortable? I just want to address, there's a little bit before the uncomfortable part. There's a kind of a little bit of a why disclose at all. And I think that one of the really biggest benefits of a sustainability report is that it's a great opportunity to, it provides a disciplined process to look at all of these different issues. So it really helps companies with their internal management. You kind of, okay, we're going to go through this, we're going to go through this. You know, it's like that checklist process and that putting something in public process helps change the companies. It helps the management. Where the sustainability reporting and the stakeholder communications mechanisms you know, relate to, for example, communities, putting the difficult story in there makes you more credible. The Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil is an example, a really strong one, where there are grievance mechanisms. So you have a local community that gets affected, they can make a complaint to RSPO, and then the company has to respond to that, or it risks its relationship with the RSPO. That process is transparent, and that transparency creates greater credibility so that people do actually trust it.
What if that is still in the process of developing the solution, or
Yeah.
you know, it's not the whole loop of fixing problem yet? What extent that you would recommend us to, you know, if we attempt to disclose something, would be at that what level that would be acceptable for good reporting?
It's really, obviously everything has to be on a case-by-case basis. So take the specific issue, how upset are your stakeholders, you know, have the communication. It relies on the idea that actually you have a very goodwill, good faith attempt to manage the issue. If you're just trying to get rid of the issue, then okay, maybe don't disclose it because you're trying to hide from it. But that's not, you know, an honest attempt. If it's an honest attempt, then enough that people feel confident that you have really tried. You know, that's the. I'm afraid without the specifics, it's hard to give a more detailed answer than that.
You have any example on maybe any industry that you would pick up and give us like example briefly?
Well, Unilever has plenty of examples actually around tea workers. Actually, Tata Group also had issues with tea in Assam. There's disclosure around that. On RSPO, I think Sime Darby is an interesting one. They had some issues in Liberia. But the transparency actually is not necessarily their own internal reporting. In that case, it was the RSPO's communication. But having that in public, and that's very detailed, you can access it. So even the letters that the RSPO sends to the company are in public. Are there any? Yeah, we have another question. Unless, if you have a particularly strong voice, just go for it.
I guess just have a quick question, just to confirm my understanding, because I'm one of the person that working on this type of disclosure. I guess what I'm hearing is that it depends on your business nature, what you consider to be material to your stakeholder. And when you do ESP, you basically can focus on that particular issue, such as like CO2 is not related to service business, such as bank or insurance. So does that mean that we can kind of don't have to touch on those items, but rather focus on the issue that we know that our stakeholder is facing? My question is, if I'm not do a comprehensive touch on all the topics, would that be considered material omission? Because the reason I ask that question is because when we work on the ESP type of assessment, in the past, what we've done is we focus on the key items that we think are bothering our stakeholders. But of course, because we are a service company, we don't look at CO2, we don't look at the waste, we don't look at, we may not even grow trees, but yes, we go to, we do doing some social work, which on your screen you may consider it as CSR rather than sustainability. But do we have sustainability? We do, but it was just more of one side of it. It was for the main stakeholder, but not for the community. We may do just at the level of CSR. But then when it comes to our customer, it could be at the level of sustainability. It's a mixture. My question is, when I do the ESP report, to show this, what we've been doing, is it wrong, or is it not right? Is it not perfect to touch on every angles that that we have to touch on?
Thanks for the question. So yes, absolutely, different industries have different issues that they need to manage at different levels. And by the way, thank you. In terms of using that assessment, absolutely, I think you can use it on different issues that you're managing. So some issues you kind of go, all right, well, a bit of charity, that's enough. Others, you want to take a long way. So I think that's the right way to think about that framework. Thank you. I guess, do you want to just rephrase the short part of the question again, actually? Do you mind?
I guess the last phrase, it's the question really is what does sustainability report look like?
So do we have to have everything?
Correct.
Or do we just really focus on these particular bits?
Correct, because when you talk about stakeholder, you could talk about community, you could talk about your customer, you could talk about environment, you could talk about trees or forest. What we're saying here is that we're not manufacturing, we don't create CO2. We rent buildings, so we cannot do anything with the wastewater.
Can I ask which industry? Sorry.
Sorry, we are a life insurance company. So, so our main stakeholder really is the policyholder, giving them the right information, making sure that they can do their long-term financial planning, educate them, give them information. When we talk about giving them information, we're not just talking about when we want to sell products to them. We talk about giving knowledge to even kindergartens to make sure that they know how to do financial planning. So that type of thing is what we've been focusing on. But then when it comes to wastewater from the building, do we really monitor it, whether we reusing them or do we focus on energy? This year we look at this is how much we use for electricity, and last year how much I have to say that there are certain things that we focus on because of our business. But when it comes to environmental, do we go to certain part of the country to do some environmental projects? We do. But somehow what difficult really is the linkage between what we've done to economics of the company.
Okay.
So we got that, and what I'm saying is certain components of it, we don't take it up to sustainability level, but then there are certain things that we do take it up to. But if we're missing anything, does that mean our report is not perfect?
So I'm not, well, thankfully I'm not in the business anymore of judging reports, so I wouldn't give it a non-perfect. I'd always say it's a journey. One thing though for a life, one part of the link might be if your staff really like those activities and it's motivating for the staff, great, motivating for the staff, it's linked to the business in that way. There might be another link for a life assurance company specifically. So there will presumably be a fund, and that fund will presumably be invested in capital markets. So the question would be, to what level is the fund implementing responsible investment? And that could potentially be a new area to explore and a new avenue. If the fund starts to encourage the companies it's invested in to work on CO2, at that point in time, it can be helpful to have gone through the experience oneself. So the companies that you're asking, in fact, at the cooperative asset management in the UK, it was primarily a life insurance, well, it was life and general insurance, actually. So that's where we sort of sat inside. If the rest of the business is sort of doing that checklisty kind of stuff, it might not be so relevant to you, but it just kind of can be a little more comfortable when you're engaging with companies, asking them to improve. That might be one area of linkage. Other areas of linkage, I would say it's probably primarily within the responsible investment area. It also depends what you're trying to do with the report. Are you trying to win an award? Are you trying to get a DJSI rating? If you're trying to get a DJSI rating, they're going to judge you. They're going to judge you on every indicator. You need to tick every box. If, on the other hand, you're really just wanting to focus primarily on adding value because that's what you believe is right for your own business, you might find that you don't need to tick every box. So you kind of need to decide what you want to do with it, how it's going to link to your value creation, and run with that. I hope that helps. I know I haven't answered the question fully. Are there any others? On the floor, I don't know how we are for time.
ไม่มีคำถามเพิ่มเติมนะคะ Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Benjamin Macker, for your insightful presentation. ขอบคุณมากค่ะ Thank you very much ค่ะ
Thank you.
ค่ะและสำหรับ presentation นะคะเราจะมีเผยแพร่ทางเว็บไซต์ของ SET